There is no 0 RER. There is no 10 RPE with perfect technique. That is not a fucking thing. So at one point or another in our lives, we all reach the same conclusion. Dang, I need to get jacked. And regardless of where you are in life, one thing will always be true. Being jacked is pretty fucking cool. So the goal of this video is to go over what it takes to actually run a hypertrophy program. We'll talk about some of the theories, some of the common myths that oftentimes gets talked about here in the internet, and eventually we'll talk about how to actually run a hypertrophy program, hopefully in the most efficient way possible. So I always make an effort to stay up to date with the most recent research, but as far as I can tell, we still don't know and we're not quite sure about how hypertrophy actually occurs. You know, there's a bunch of leading theories, and more than anything, this is the field where everybody has a fucking opinion. But I've said it before, guys, hypertrophy is the most simple and basic way of training that we all start with. Growing muscle should not be that complicated, and it's not that complicated. It's not like trying to get a bigger clean and jerk. It's not like improving your squat. It's not like getting a elite sprinter to run a little faster. Those are complicated issues, you know, and things that require like a great deal of thinking and periodization and like proper training. Meanwhile, getting your bicep to be a little bigger is oftentimes not that complicated, you know. And there's a huge discussion about this topic because you see a lot of the most famous coaches that are still saying things that are technically outdated, you know, but they're still training the biggest guys and they're still the best coaches in the world. You know, it's because we know what it takes to grow muscle. And all of the things that we now talk about, like they're like novel and like new research, are oftentimes ways of inching slightly better results. You're looking for like that 1% edge on something. But at the end of the day, if you're just starting or you're trying to get a little bigger, you need to pay attention to those things that are gonna get you like 90% of the way there. You know, once you're there, yeah, dive all you want into the minute details of whatever it is you're doing. But for the meantime, focus on the big picture. Eat enough, train hard, period. Oh, and of course, sleep a lot. So honestly, when it comes to hypertrophy, discussing theory can sometimes be fun, but a lot of times can just be a waste of time. Seriously, you have myofibrillar hypertrophy, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, whatever the fuck that is, or if it even ends up being a thing, mTOR activation, protein synthesis regulation, catabolism deregulation, rep ranges, nutrition, stretch, leverages. What this guy said, what that guy said, this split, that split, the best split. I promise you that worrying about all of that can oftentimes just be a huge waste of time. So what part of theory can actually be useful for us to grow bigger muscles? I'm, for one, a huge proponent of periodization, even in its most basic of forms. Like periodization, like I've said before, is nothing but the scheduling of training sessions. So as long as you put in something on a schedule, you're already periodizing your training. And I think that's an important part. So what split are you going to follow? Make sure you follow that split. You can do the pro split, you can do an upper lower, you can do a full body split, whatever it may be. You know, make up your own. It doesn't matter. Just choose a split and stick to it. That is the important part. The second part is understanding what hypertrophy training actually entails. You know, hypertrophy training, bodybuilding training, it's its own little like subsection of training in general. You know, it's not like training for power, it's not like training for strength, it's not like training for speed. It's training to essentially grow. And growing is just another adaptation. And what do you need to generate an adaptation in our bodies? You need two things. One, you need a stimulus. Okay. And what is a stimulus? Is essentially like a break on the balance in your body. In other words, it's just you getting hurt in one way or another. And the second thing is to have enough substrates and nutrients in order to recover when you are going through the process of recovery. That is it. If you fulfill those two things, you are going to grow. So where does it get complicated? Well, that's the thing. It shouldn't get complicated. But I do think people run into a couple of issues. So let's address those. The first thing is that you need to figure out what your goal actually is. Are we trying to stay fit and athletic for a sport? Do we want to train like an athlete? Do we want to run a marathon? Or are we actually just trying to put on as much muscle as possible in a short period of time? Deciding what you actually want to do should be the first step in this process, because if there's a disconnection between the goal that you actually want and how you're training, you will get discouraged when the results of your training don't add up to what you had planned in your head. Because the truth is that if putting on muscle is your priority, there is a way that you can train to make sure that that is exactly what happens, and that happens as fast as possible. So for the most part, if you're in a good body fat percentage range, let's say around 15%, or if you're genuinely comfortable with the way you look and you wouldn't mind putting on a few pounds, you should go into a bulk because it's the most efficient and best way to go about putting on muscle, especially if you're trying to do it in a short period of time. Now, if you are above that 15% body fat, if you would really not like to put on some fat, then maybe you should consider going into a cut first and getting into a place where you are very comfortable with the way you look and then go into a bulk. And the reason why I talk about just bulking and cutting, and I'm not talking about anything like main gaining or doing a lean bulk, is because doing those things is just not as efficient as just going into a proper bulk. It'll be slower. You can do it, but it'll be slower. And if I'm being completely honest with you, it might not even be as fun. Like going on a bulk is fun as long as you don't go overboard, because I have gone overboard and it fucking sucks coming back. But as long as you don't go overboard, bulking is fun. Like you should enjoy that fucking experience. You get to eat mostly whatever you want and you get to train fucking hard, which is fun. The next thing that trips a lot of people up is just not giving themselves a little bit of grace and being just kinder to themselves. Generally, this takes time. Building muscle is a long process. So if you're expecting like huge changes in the matter of like 2 months, it's not gonna happen. You're gonna have to spend a year, couple years, maybe even 3 to 5 years, truly working at this in order to get truly big. The good news is that once you get there, the amount of effort that it takes to stay jacked is very, very little. I have a video talking about this at a link here. But generally, if you make the sacrifice for the next couple of years, chances are you're never going to have to do it again in your life. And that should be something to look forward to. So now let's get a little more technical. You need to understand the basics of training. Okay, the basics of training science. So there's a lot of discussion nowadays about splits and what the actual proper technique is. The good news to you is that if bodybuilding and hypertrophy is your goal, that's your preferred method of training, you're in luck because the feedback loop that you get with hypertrophy training is super short. And this is a good thing. What do I mean by this? Unlike other sports that are very technique dependent, you should have pretty good training sessions every day. Okay? It's not like going into Olympic weightlifting, going into a sport like basketball, doing something like tennis, where like you could just be having a shitty day, your reaction's not quite there and you just have a bad training session. Unless you're going in a pretty steep cut, this should never be the case when it comes to bodybuilding training. You should literally know after every set whether that was a good set or not. Okay? And that's what I mean by the feedback loop being extremely short. You should get a good pump out of that movement. Doing the exercise should feel good. So every time you go into the gym, you should come out feeling pretty good about yourself. And that's a good fucking thing. And that is a fun thing that you don't really get in other styles of training. To be completely honest with you, I've always hated bodybuilding because I was training to be a better rugby player or a better weightlifter. So I didn't care about what I looked like. I just wanted to know how much weight I was moving, how fast I was getting, and how good of a shape I was in. And over the last few years, because I've been busy and I just don't have enough time to train anymore, I've come to like really enjoy bodybuilding because, like I said, doesn't matter what kind of day I've had, doesn't matter how tired I am, I can go in and get a pretty good upper body session. Lower body days still kind of hurt and they're a little nerve wracking, but for the most part, going in to do arms, to do chest, to do back is usually pretty fucking fun. And this gets me to the topic of splits and exercise selection. Another key pillar in proper periodization and training science is the concept of variability. I see a lot of talk online about training splits. Which training split is better? Which one should I be doing? Is this one better than this other one? And I'm here to tell you that that shouldn't fucking matter. I can almost promise you that the only reason why you were at a plateau, you couldn't get more results, you couldn't improve at anything, and then you changed your split and started seeing results again, is because of variability in the addition of a novel stimulus to your training. That is a real thing. Training goes stale. That's why it's important to vary your training. I would advise you to stay in 4 to 8 week training blocks of doing pretty much the same exercises or slight variations of them as you progress. But for the most part, don't make any drastic changes in anything less than 4 weeks, ideally maybe 8 weeks. But after that period ends, you are allowed to make drastic changes and you can pretty much do whatever the fuck you want. So if you find an exercise online that looks really cool, you know, kind of figure out how long you've been training with your current split or your current exercise selection. If it's been like 6 weeks, stick it out. Keep doing that split for 2 more weeks, and then incorporate those new movements. That's what I do. I keep a list of things that I find interesting that I'm going to be doing here in the next 4 months or in the next 4 weeks. I don't change what I'm doing on a weekly basis at all, to be honest with you. And I think that's a good habit that most people should have. And lastly, let's talk about how to run a program more efficiently. Like I said earlier, bodybuilding takes time. Okay. And if you are truly trying to get big, you should be willing to train 4, 5, maybe even 6 days a week. That is just the reality of hypertrophy training and training to get big. Because the more you do, the better results you'll get. For the most part, you reach a point where like doing more will just cause like diminishing returns. But it's a hard point to get to, especially if you're not training legs like every day. Like as long as you keep your leg days to 2 a week, you can do a lot of fucking work in the realm of bodybuilding. So as long as you're recovering and eating enough, you can essentially do as much as you're capable of. Keep an eye on your recovery levels, how much you're eating, how much you're feeling, how much you're lifting, and as long as you're making steady progress, you can stay with those splits that are like high on volume. Bodybuilding is the type of sport where you can honestly do a lot without affecting your progress. Like, is it really going to be that bad to go in and do forearms and shoulders again? Like, no, you're going to be fine. Now, there are ways of doing less and still get good results. Just know that if you ever get impatient or feel like you're not making enough progress, you can literally just do more and you'll probably see better results. So if you're on the other side, if you want to be doing less, there are some minimums that we can follow in order to make sure that we're not, spending all of our time in the gym, but still making decent progress. We do have splits that, at least anecdotally, seem to be paying off pretty well for people that use them, and they require like a more minimalistic approach to training. Things like a full body split, I think they call it full body every other day, that allows you to have a high frequency of training because you're hitting every single body part like every other day, but the overall volume is still not gigantic. And you can, honestly, for the most part, because I've tried it, you can recover pretty well between those days. There are options for you to follow. You can do something like an upper lower. That's 4 days of training a week. You hit every single body part twice, which is kind of like a minimum that you need in order to effectively grow. And things like that. There's a lot of things that you can do without having to spend all of your time in the gym. And as long as you're training hard and eating enough and sleeping plenty, you're going to grow. So now let's address one of the other big topics, which is intensity. How hard should you train? An easy way to think about this is that the less overall volume you are doing, during the week, in terms of reps, in terms of sets, the harder you have to train. So if you're training 6 days a week, chances are that if you just leave 2 to 3 reps in reserve, maybe let's say 2 reps in reserve, on every set, you're going to grow. You're going to be doing pretty good, because you are providing the body with a lot of volume, a lot of reasons to continue to grow. Your frequency is quite high. But if you're only training 3 days a week, at least one of those sets for every movement that you're doing should be pretty close to failure. Like, you should be going in and suffering a little bit, because the body doesn't have that much volume. There's not that many signals going into the body saying like, hey, if we keep doing this, we're going to be in trouble. We need to grow. When your frequency is much lesser, the intensity of those sessions needs to be higher. That's just how it works. And it takes time to figure out where you are. Some body parts may just react differently. Some movements may feel better going to failure. Like things like your delts, your forearms. Yeah, you can train those to failure every day and probably be just fine. Quads on the other hand, yeah, you should be looking at leaving 2 reps in reserve, maybe a rep in reserve if you're hitting them more than twice a week. Otherwise, you're just simply not going to recover. All right, and that kind of pulls us back to maybe the last topic that I'm going to talk about, and that is rep ranges. Now, here's what I can tell you about rep ranges. It doesn't matter that much. Most of the times, you're still going to be obeying by the basic principle of variability that I talked about earlier. If you're always hammering this one body part with low rep ranges, something like your triceps because they're mostly fast twitch, you will stagnate your progress. Okay. And it could be prudent and a very good idea to maybe for the next 4 weeks start doing high rep ranges, simply because you're going to be providing the body with a novel stimulus. So if you ever feel stuck, change the rep range. It doesn't matter that much. We know for the most part, and all the literature seems to point to the fact that from 5 to 30 reps, you are going to grow. Okay, that doesn't mean that from 5 or like from 1 to 5, you're not going to grow. It just seems to be like the growth really starts like spiking after 5 reps. That's a big rep range. 5 to 30 is a huge rep range. So add some variability to your training, keep it interesting, keep it exciting. One easy way of like periodizing this is just hitting every muscle part with 2 movements, or maybe just the same movement, but doing a few sets at a very, very heavy weight, and then doing 2 sets at a lighter weight with high rep ranges. Completely fine, very fun. I've done it in the past. I usually do it like that. Works very, very well. Now, I know I've been talking mostly in general terms in this video, but to be honest with you, one of the things that I think makes hypertrophy training and bodybuilding very fun and very interesting is that it is a very general methodology of training. There are tons of ways that you can approach it. Everybody has their own way of approaching training. We all like different things. So there isn't a set of rules that we all have to follow when it comes to how you schedule your training. The only set of rules that we have are just the basics of periodization and training science that we know for a fact to be true. Things like you need to train pretty hard, you need to eat enough, and you need to recover a lot if you expect to grow. So train hard, eat a lot, sleep a lot. It's honestly all you need to know. Now, yeah, for the most part, that's about it. Follow the basics that you're going to find here on YouTube over and over and over again. Eat enough protein, get enough sleep, train hard. Don't be afraid of lifting heavy, especially if you're not training that much and that often a week. Lift heavy. It's fun to use a little bit of momentum, especially for a lot of your rowing or pulling movements. You can use momentum. There is no 0 RER. There is no 10 RPE with perfect technique. That is not a fucking thing. So train hard, especially if you're not training that much. Make sure you're not overtraining if you're training 6 days a week. And yeah, bodybuilding should feel good. It should be fun. Don't make it into a weird fucking complicated thing because it doesn't need to be. All right, and that's the video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you guys got something useful out of it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. I love talking to you guys. Free training guide below, 20 training principles that are a must, and I can assure you will help you with your training. Completely free for anybody interested. And yeah, thanks for watching.
It is important to draw wisdom from many different places. If we take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. Understanding others, the other elements, and the other nations will help you become whole.